All right, so we're still talking about the quadratic formula, but now we're going to discuss what the discriminant is. So the discriminant is found inside of the quadratic formula, and the discriminant is what is going to help us determine the type and number of solutions that we are going to have. So for a quadratic equation, there's three possibilities. I either have two real solutions, one real solution, or no real solutions, which means there's two imaginary. So recall, for two real, that means my parabola is dipping down and coming back up, and it hits in two spots, right? For one real, then my parabola is just sitting on the x-axis and only the vertex is touching. And for no real, it is never touching the x-axis, which means there is going to be two imaginary solutions. Now, inside the quadratic formula, you'll see what's underneath the radical here, b squared minus 4ac. This is called the discriminant. Now, the discriminant is going to describe the type of solutions that we have. All right, so we have three separate cases for the discriminant. If my discriminant is positive, then that means I have two real solutions. Now, what I really want you to get is that the discriminant is only the value b squared minus 4ac. Now, that is found underneath the radical in the quadratic equation, but if I ask you for the discriminant, I am strictly asking you for the value you get when you do b squared minus 4ac. I am not asking you to also include the radical with that answer. Okay? So let's say we evaluate b squared minus 4ac and we get a positive number. Now that means that I'm going to have two real solutions. So if you were to graph that, it would hit the x-axis twice and we would have two real values for our answer. The reason is that b squared minus 4ac is found underneath the square root in the quadratic formula. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, so this is a little side note, let's say the discriminant ends up being 37. So you find b squared minus 4ac and you get the number 37. Well, if you're looking at the quadratic formula, that value is underneath a square root, and there's a plus and minus in front of it. And then, of course, you have negative b and then 2a underneath it. But remember, that means I have a real number plus a real number divided by a real number. I have a real number minus a real number divided by a real number. So that is two real solutions. Now, the second scenario is you do your math, so you do b squared minus 4ac, and you get 0, okay? So your discriminant value would be 0, but remember that's found underneath the square root in the quadratic formula. So then you'll have your negative b plus or minus in front, and then you'll be divided by 2a. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0. So this entire term here goes away, right? So then we would just be left with negative b over 2a. Well, that's just one value. There's no plus or minus anymore because the plus or minus goes with the radical, but the radical went away. So now I'm left with only one real solution. So when your discriminant ends up being 0, you only have one real solution. And look at that. What does that value look like? Negative b over 2a, hopefully you recognize that as your vertex, right? That's the x-coordinate of your vertex. So our graph is only touching once at the vertex. Our last scenario is you do you do b squared minus 4ac, and you get your discriminant to be negative. So let's say, hypothetically, you get negative 37. So this is just an example. So you did your discriminant and you got negative 37. Well, remember, in the quadratic formula, that is underneath a square root, right? So I have negative b plus or minus. We're saying hypothetically that that's a negative 37 and it's all over 2a. Well, negative underneath the radical means that an I is going to pop out of the radical. Okay? So if there's an I there, that means this is negative b plus I, radical 37, divided by 2a. Negative b minus I, square root of 37, divided by 2a. Those are two imaginary answers because they both include the number I. Okay? So anytime you evaluate your discriminant, and your discriminant is a negative number, you have no real solutions, Okay, there's no real solutions, and that means that there's 2 imaginary. Okay, so to recap, remember your discriminant is just the value b squared minus 4ac, not including the radical. Okay, and there's 3 possibilities here. Our discriminant is positive, we'll have 2 real solutions. Our discriminant is 0, we will have 1 real solution. And if it's negative, we will have 2 imaginary solutions. All right, so I want to look at this quadratic, and without solving it, I want to describe the type and number of solutions that I'm going to get, okay? So sometimes you don't always want the exact answers, but you want to know what type of solutions you'll receive. So will you have 2? Will you have only 1? Are they going to be imaginary? Because if they're imaginary, maybe that doesn't help you. So we take a look at the discriminant. So your quadratic needs to be in standard form, which this one is, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So a here is negative 2, b is negative 3, and c is 5. So now plugging into our discriminant formula, so b squared minus 4ac, notice there's no radical because the actual discriminant does not include the radical, minus 4 times a times c. So evaluating that, I'm going to get 9, and then I do 4 times negative 2 times 5. So that's going to give me negative 40, which will be 9 plus 40, which is 49. Okay, so my discriminant is positive, right? My discriminant is a positive number, which means I will have 2 real solutions. So remember, I want the type and the number of solutions you will get. All right, so now it's your turn. Go ahead and take a look at these quadratics and find the type and number of solutions that each of them will have using the discriminant.